Really, we could do one of two things to end 2022. We could do a podcast where we go through all the clubs in the world of rugby league and decide what gradings we're going to give them. But that would be completely pointless, only would spark debate, and it's just clickbait, really. Or we can bring you some stuff that we've done, and he's on YouTube, but he's not yet a podcast. So here we are. The 4020 Christmas selection box. It's like the cheese things you get in the shop or the chocolate. A lot more expensive than they used to be, if you notice that. But this is free. 3 bits of stuff we've done over the last couple of months, all wrapped up for you to fill up an hour or so of your time. Starting with J.R. Rickwood, who's written a book called Cougarmania, which is all about, disappointingly, the Keighley Cougars. No, I'm only joking. It's really good. And here we are talking about it. Johnny J.R. Rickwood, author of Cougarmania, which I'm holding up here.
There we are.
This is it. The cliche is a labour of love, Johnny. I mean, sometimes I've thought about writing a book, and then I give up quickly. And I've looked through the appendices and references at the back of this, and that's why I don't bother writing a book, because you've put so much effort into this, and I could never get anywhere near that. Why? Why have you written this? Why have you done this?
I think the key word, I was sat in my lounge one morning and I was working on I've written one fiction book and I was working on a fiction book. And I got to the point where I just thought, no, it's not working for me. So I thought, right, need to go back to storyboard. And I sat there and I thought, what is an incredible story? And for years, every time I thought of what's an incredible story, it was Cougarmania. Just that story of kind of rags to riches with all the characters and all the swerves, the twists, the turns, you know, the proverbial goodies and baddies all thrown into the mix, and you've got one hell of a story. And I was a bit like yourself. I thought, oh, I don't know if I can, I don't know if I'll be able to do this because I'll have to speak to a lot of people. And really that day, I just kind of thought, well, surely somebody's written something. Surely there's already a book about Cougarmania. And there was a book by a guy called Brian Lund, and it was written in the mid-90s. And it's just here, actually. I read it quite often, and Brian's book is really good. But it's years old, and it kind of stopped around 97. So I kind of thought, well, I need to tell this story. So that's why I started.
Starting and then couldn't finish, because this is, as I say, this is a lot of work. I mean, how many words have you got in this? 450 odd pages. This is a hell of a piece of work.
Yeah, 100. I think it ended up around 150 odd thousand, maybe more. Can't remember. 175, something like that.
I struggled getting a dissertation. I had to get my wife to type it up for me at the time. So there's no way I could do anything like this. But you are telling a story of something which, it seems to be another one of those rugby league things that, I guess there could be a book written like this about Toronto. A bright flash that fizzled out, but is potentially coming back in some form or another with the current run of Keighley back in the championship. But what's your connection with the club? Why are you sat here talking about a book about the Keighley Cougars, which, for all intents and purposes, are a second, third division rugby league team?
So I'm a product, really, of Cougarmania. So Cougars came to my school because I grew up in Oxenhope in West Yorkshire, and they came to my school. I think I was around about 7 or 8. It's in the book, but I can't remember the exact age. And I met Andy Ayres and Joe Grimmer. And I was just I fell in love with the whole concept of Cougarmania, which was obviously geared very heavily towards people in my demographic. And then I left Yorkshire when I was about 18. I went to Wales, and I've stayed here ever since, really. And I kind of lost touch with what was going on. And as you'll know, and as people who listen to the podcast will know, the Cougars have had some really bad troubles over the years. And really, until the O'Neills came back in, I'd not paid much attention to the club. But then I just rediscovered Cougarmania and all of its wonders. And I thought, this story, I've just got to tell it, start to finish.
It's a great period of change across rugby league, of course, in the mid-90s, the evolution of Super League, mergers, rebrands all over the place. But Keighley seem to have got there first with the Cougar name. And I know that obviously other clubs have had names and such in the past, but they really got behind not just having a name attached like Huddersfield Barracudas say, but actually getting behind it with the community work and getting involved with the kids and the future generations of supporters.
Exactly. And I think that's what the key was, is like you said, there was the Huddersfield Barracudas. There'd been the raft of expansion teams in the 80s that had taken on names such, like the Mansfield Marksmen, etc. And really everything that had come prior to them, I'm going to put the Sheffield Eagles in one corner, really, aside from the other teams I'm talking about. But all those other clubs, they just provided the name change. They hadn't provided the culture change and the kind of progression that Keighley was showing at the time. And I think that's what made them stand out, is they reformed not only the club top to bottom and the culture, but also the town as well. And they did, if you look at things that Gary Hetherington's Sheffield Eagles were doing as well, there was one article that I read where basically somebody had written to all the clubs and asked them for, they portrayed themselves as a fan moving to the area, and they asked for a fixture list, and they asked for, what merchandise do you sell and when your home games and directions, etc. And the only rugby league club that could provide them all of those information was the Sheffield Eagles. So I think what Keighley did in a sense is they really took that Americanized presentation of sport and the idea of integrating a club into the community, and that is what they progressed.
It's strange because I've mentioned before, one of the things that got me in the mid-90s was ice hockey. And the adverts on the radio for the Sheffield Steelers, and went to plenty of games, still follow them from afar these days. Don't get to as many games as I like to, but that's a costing and an everything else thing as everything else is these days. But they sold the, what's it, the old phrase? They sold the sizzle rather than the steak. So, but once you got there, you found out, oh, actually, this ice hockey is quite entertaining. And it's the same with rugby league in a sense, isn't it? You have to sell people on something more than just a game. And it's not just a problem for Keighley in the late 80s, early 90s. This is a problem that's still going on today, it seems, and it's still a problem we haven't solved.
Exactly. And I think that rugby league is, and I won't get into the kind of historic issues of league that I kind of discovered during the research of the book. But one of the main is rugby league doesn't really know how to sell itself, as you will know. And the thing that Keighley did in the 90s is they looked outside of what the traditional ways of marketing were, which were non-existent, to be honest. And let's not forget that they were a third-tier side as they are now. They were the bottom of the barrel. They'd finished bottom of the whole of the rugby league just a couple of years prior. And what they did is they looked at what was working elsewhere. They took a model, that Americanized model from the States, and they brought that to the UK. And, we're talking about things like, a jazzy shirt with sponsorships, reaching out to communities, having Cougar classrooms. They were doing things like even a failed attempt at launching their own Cougar Vision TV show with matches. They were doing things like that way before, not just, the rugby league sides, but the football sides, the rugby union sides. They were really ahead of the game. And I think, as you said, with ice hockey, I mean, I was kind of brought into that glitz and glamour. Films like The Mighty Ducks in the 90s brought me into it. And as a kid, you would look at your sports teams and you wouldn't have any of that. And that's what Keighley provided.
It's interesting because, as you say, from the doldrums of the mid to late 80s, where would Keighley have been without Cougarmania, as daft a question as that is?
Well, it's quite an interesting what if, really, because I had two interesting chats, one during the writing of the book and one afterwards. During the writing, I spoke to the chairman that kind of left just as the O'Neill regime sort of started with Smith and Spencer, a guy called Colin Farrer. And Colin actually came back with Neil Spencer and saved the club again in, I believe it was 20, I can't remember the date. But it's twice that Colin saved the club. Now, Colin is a very successful businessman, and I've gotten absolutely no kind of reservations that if Colin had been at the helm, Keighley would have teetered along. as a club in existence for a number of years. But then we bring in something like Super League when all of this change is kind of forced on clubs, and we see the impact of what happened to some sides then. And I think Keighley probably, without that backing that was required at the time, there probably wouldn't have been a Keighley club.
We are now at this stage again where we're going to have another shake-up. We're not quite sure what the gradings or criteria will be to be a grade A, grade B, grade C club or whatever. Keighley are trying to position themselves. Well, are they trying to position themselves? Just they're not big fans of what's going on at the moment.
I think so. To put in a nutshell, what's happening at the moment, I think for people involved at Keighley and the supporters, there is a very big sense of deja vu. In the sense of when I was writing this book, a lot of the things I was writing about then started to happen in real life in regards to Cougars doing extremely well this season and then gaining promotion. There's some vast differences between what's being proposed now and what happened last time that obviously we haven't got time to go into those. But I think that from Keighley's perspective, they are wholly and 100% correct in their assertion that merit of performance on the field of play should be one of the key, if not the only, decision-making tool in who plays in the top division in a sport. But we have to also look at the position that we're in. And I think that is where it's become difficult for Keighley because they are on that huge trajectory. They have money, they have investors, they have sponsors that have joined them, similarly as what they have done back in 94-95. Now, those sponsors in 94-95 disappeared. As soon as the door was shut, they were gone. And I think the worry is that could potentially happen this time. That is why there's been such a pushback. So there's the two points there. One, they don't believe that it's right in the ethos of the sport. And two, it could be extremely damaging for the club. But personally, I'm not going to give all my views on what's happening here. There's not enough time, but I can completely 100% understand their frustration. And I do have a worry that we're going to be in a position where big decisions are going to have to be made in a short space of time again. And potentially we could really impact those kind of smaller clubs.
Keighley as a town, you know it far better than I do, because I think I've only been there a couple of times. How does it compare with the likes of, say, a St Helens or a Castleford or a Widnes, just picking three places out at random, Warrington or what at Rochdale?
Yeah.
Is it that much smaller than any of these other places, some of which are in Super League, some of which are not?
Well, that was another interesting thing in my research is I did have a look at a number of the census graphs. And Keighley, without a doubt, is in the lower third of the population of rugby league towns as it was back in 95 when they made the decision. And Maurice Lindsay said to me, Keighley was a small town. They were too small. And if you do look at population, if you take somebody like at the time, if you take a London at whatever million, and you take a Nottingham at whatever million, a Blackpool at whatever million, and you compare them, in that kind of comparison of millions to thousands, Keighley and Castleford are roughly the same size. Wigan's not significantly bigger than Keighley, but the big thing that is kind of overlooked when looking at this is we look at the population of a town. Now, if you look at Keighley on a map and where it's positioned, it's more North Yorkshire, heading up towards Cumbria. And a lot of the support at in the 90s came from that area. So really, I think when we look at sizes of places, we do need, it is important. But no, I wouldn't say it's significantly smaller than, one of those towns.
As you mentioned, Maurice Lindsay, and I've got to find it in the book now. He does mention that you spoke to him about Keighley, and he said it's a small town. It's not big enough to not directly quote him, but obviously there were plenty of small towns involved in Super League or close to Super League at the time. So what was it like speaking to him? Because obviously you're one of the last people to interview him, and obviously he's a massively divisive figure. That's not a understatement. What was he like to speak to?
So I think, first of all, it was a real privilege to speak to Maurice because I've always wanted to ask him those questions. it was a very cathartic exercise, and he didn't have to talk to me. He knew what I was writing about. He knew the questions would be difficult, and obviously he was not in the best of health. So I really did appreciate the fact that he spoke to me. But that is something as a wider rugby league community that people do. We're a very, if you ignore Twitter, we're a very nice, loving community. But then again, I didn't really agree with a lot of the things Morris said, and they were pretty much a carbon copy of what he said between 95 and 2001 or whatever it was. I think specifically, like when we're talking about a club being too small, yes, Keighley's smaller than Wigan. It is smaller than St Helens. It's smaller than Huddersfield. It's a small place. But then if you look at the kind of attendances and the potential at the time, I mean, really, if we start to kind of hamstring and pigeonhole and kind of take clubs and put them like that, what I was sort of trying to explain during our conversation is that we're kind of creating, our own kind of, basically, we're telling the clubs what their destiny are and not allowing them to achieve what they could achieve. But the thing that I did kind of get into a slight bit of confusion with Morris was that he kept referring to the criteria for Super League. Now, as far as I could find in all my research, there wasn't any written criteria for that first Super League. It was just what had been kind of thought of in Morris's head and communicated by Morris and Sir Rodney. But the interview with Morris was really good. It was great, but he was, well, it probably would have been easier for me to get into Buckingham Palace. He was that guarded, is all I would say. But he did agree to speak to me again, and there were plans that I would call him up and speak to him when the book was finished. But obviously, he did pass away, so that didn't happen.
I do like the fact that he, straight away after you do your introduction, he's straight on the front foot. He's not holding back. He's going to
Nope.
He's putting his agenda on the table. This is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm saying. You're not going to dissuade me from this. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, if we'd have been in a fight, that would have been a jab straight away, definitely.
But as I have said on the podcast before, sometimes you need a leader like that, and obviously it wasn't to the benefit of Keighley, but maybe, well, someone would say to the detriment of the sport or not. It's up to people to decide on his legacy, isn't it? And that will be discussed for many, many years. It's a shame that there's not a book about him. He didn't write his book before he passed away, because it would have been fascinating to really get into his brain. Bullmania.
Yeah.
What an interesting concept. And it does seem that this story is, I'll use a Wakefield comparison. I think we're all, as Wakefield fans, stuck in 1968, despite the fact that the week after that kick, we won the championship for the second straight season. But we can't get past that moment in time. Is there a danger that Keighley fans can't get past this moment? You've mentioned the current situation and going back to 94, 95, 96. Does there need to be some kind of catharsis that gets everyone past this and moves forward? Or can that even be done?
I mean, first of all, I don't think at the moment, I think Keighley would very happily go along with just being Keighley. But what kind of keeps happening is, and when I say keeps happening, that sounds like it happens every week. It doesn't. But what does seem to happen is there are these major decisions that are made, such as the removal of academies, etc. And this season, obviously, the potential restructuring via grading by IMG. And these things happen to Keighley when they seem to be on quite an upward trajectory. Now, that is purely coincidence. There is no conspiracy, obviously. But yes, there is a possibility that does become Keighley's, that becomes the part in their history that they can't get past, because it's something that they achieved. It's something that was real. It was something that was felt. It was tasted, and it was taken away. And I think for a number of the clubs that were kind of in the same boat at the same time, they got that back. Widnes got it back. Wakefield got it back. Salford got it back, etc., etc. But Keighley and Batley, they were two of the clubs that didn't get it back. But Keighley were the ones that carried on that legal fight for 12 months or something like that. Spent a lot of money. It ruined lives, that decision for people involved at Keighley. So it really is that last great, it is the top of the iceberg at the moment. Everything since then has gone down. There's been peaks up, but that is the last height. And really, there's not been anything since as significantly large enough to kind of erase that. And Bullmania, that's a completely different kettle of fish on top of that.
I'm very much of the opinion that we can't keep thinking that the current Bradford Bulls Rugby League Football Club Limited, or whatever they're called, are any relation to what happened 25 years ago, because they are not. They're not getting 25,000 people. They're not selling out games, not doing this and that, and they're having to rebuild like many other clubs have done in the past. And it seems that, it's mentioned, you can't have two teams in the Bradford Metropolitan District. Right, in fact, we've got two teams in Hull, and Wakefield and Castleford are next door to each other and seemingly coexist. Why can't a Keighley and a Bradford coexist in the same division? There's no reason why they can't, is there? They're completely different entities.
They support each other. I mean, I used to go watch Bradford play at Oddsall. Prior to the announcement of Super League, I would say that the relationship between the majority of Bradford Northern fans and Cougars fans was quite good. Yes, there was the normal rivalry, but there wasn't this kind of bitter hatred that followed. You got people like Peter Rowe, who, he was a great player for Bradford, coached Keighley and played for them. Peter Rowe is beloved by both sets of players, people such as Joe Phillips with the trophy. There's enough room for a Keighley and a Bradford. The issue that happened with Keighley and Bradford is that there was an overriding feeling that what they had created at Keighley and the vibe they had was trying to be, this isn't my opinion, just first of all. The majority of the feeling was that all of that had been lifted and put in Bradford for the benefit of Bradford and Super League. Now, elements of that are completely false, but there is an element that is true, in the sense of it is absolutely 100%, fair and accurate to assume that something happening, 20 minutes down the road is not going to go unnoticed, and other clubs that look at it are going to try and replicate it. And that's what Bradford did in bringing in someone like Peter Deakin, who put his own spin on it. But I think the main issue was that what Bradford had in Super League, which was fantastic, it was Cougarmania on steroids. There was a feeling that if Keighley had had the money that was thrown behind that by not only the RFL, Super League and Sky, of course, in regards to the production, etc., the way it was hyped up on Sky TV, if they'd have had that, perhaps they could have increased their audiences by a percentile amount, such as Bradford did. Which is fair to say that could have happened. Whether it could have got to the level of Bradford of 20,000 whatever fans, that's up for debate. That's down to history. But I think that's where the main issue of that bone of content came from.
I think you've hit on something with the change of attitude in terms of it was, and I hate the word, but the kind of banter you would have between you and your rival fans in the olden days. And then when Super League came in, and it wasn't necessarily what your team did on the pitch. If your team loses, then you can blame the referee or blame, the other team cheating or whatever. But when Super League came in, you've got even more monsters to blame, such as Maurice Lindsay, the Rugby Football League, Rupert Murdoch and whoever, for your teams and clubs' failings, whether they're right or not. And that spills out onto, it used to be just the terraces, but now, as you mentioned, Twitter and social media and forums or whatever. And there is that bitter edge, which there is unfortunately the potential for that to come back in spades with whatever happens with this current grading system.
I think so. I think if you look at literally a day after the announcement, there was a number of commentators, journalists, content producers for Rugby League who immediately sat down and had some easy content to do, which was interesting watching. It's interesting watching to be like, right, what does Richard rank? How would you rank the teams? But what it did is it immediately also created a division, and we were no longer looking at what's best for Rugby League. We were looking at what's best for Leeds, what's best for Keighley, what's best for Hounslow, etc., etc. Now, that also opens up another argument of, well, who's better, Leeds, Keighley, or Hunslet? Well, I can tell you who's better. Leeds are the best. Why? Because they finished higher up in the league structure. Oh, okay. But what we're introducing as well is that secondary element that fans don't understand on a general kind of level. And Nigel Wood told me this himself when I spoke to him, is that the things that they're grading on, that go on in the background, you may have a nice shiny house from the outside, but it may be absolute mess inside. And that's what clubs are going to be graded on. And it immediately opens up all this discussion, all of these different points of view over which is best. And obviously, the traditional way of deciding which is the best is to pick up a ball and play on a field. But that's not the way we're going again. So, of course, it's going to open up so much debate.
Without mentioning any teams at all, it does seem that there are some teams in Super League at the moment who, I'm not saying are throwing this season in, but they certainly, the way they've prepared would suggest that they're not necessarily worried about finishing bottom of the pile were that to happen. But I've got no idea what's going to happen next year. And, as I say, you read these articles and people saying, well, Leeds are top and Wigan and Hull FC are B, and this, they don't know. No one has an absolute clue what's going to happen in the future.
No.
But what we're doing is what happened in the past, which is this strange thing we can try and learn from. It's an absolutely fascinating piece of work. And as Phil mentions in the magazine in the review, this is going to be one of those books that people look back on and learn from and try to replicate for their clubs and whatever. But Keighley, in such a unique place and a unique time, having to rebuild with all going on around them and still to be around today. As you say, there's been ups and downs and plenty of downs.
Yeah.
Although there's some people at the club don't like me, so that's good. But, I like Keighley better than Bradford. So, you've got that in your favour in the BD postcode area. But they could be on the way back. They could be on the way back, but it's how they get back. And do clubs have a natural level? I don't know. No one has a clue what's going to happen next. Could Keighley say, we know Warrington have got lots of investment in them. Should someone in Keighley win the Euro Millions and have £100 million, why can't Keighley be the next Warrington or whatever? There's no reason why any club outside of Super League couldn't be a Super League club or whatever they're going to rebrand it in the future just by dint of luck.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to, in my opinion, when it comes to rugby league, there's always going to be this kind of conflict between an investor who's going to invest money into a club and a club that is owned and run by somebody who has invested themselves in the club. Historically, a lot of rugby clubs were run by people that were, former players. They were elected to a role. They were owned by, the history of the clubs. And if you look now, we do have a number of teams owned by very wealthy owners who are playing out of, stadiums that are, muck stadiums, you could call them, or soccer rented stadiums, etc. But some of them are doing very well. Would I, as a Keighley fan, like to see somebody with multi-millions come in and invest in Cougars? No. Simply put, because I think that Keighley have got the right owners at the moment. I think the people that have the biggest love and heart for Keighley are the O'Neills, Mike Smith, Judith Smith, and everyone else that's involved in Keighley at the moment. I think they're the ones, and you can tell, because Keighley, the success of Keighley always kind of coexists with having somebody at the helm of the club that the fans buy into. And the people of Keighley and the fans of Keighley will only buy into an owner if they can see they are giving their heart and soul to that club. And I think that's kind of where it weighs in. Now, I think Keighley naturally would have progressed towards, the top half of the championship over the next couple of seasons if the level of investment that the O'Neills were putting in, etc., was the same. Would they have got to Super League? Who knows? Would I like to see them buy entry to Super League? No, I wouldn't.
Almost going down the Batley route. I know we're running out of time, so Batley are the best comparison of how to run things outside of Super League, I guess. Certainly in the last few seasons.
Yeah, fantastic club.
Comedy, I am told, is tragedy plus time. Is there any comedy in the demise of Cougarmania?
plenty. The amount of basically, if you start reading the book, Joe Grimmer said to me that when I spoke to Joe Grimmer, he said, "I want your book to make me laugh, but I also want it to give me a tear in my eye. And if it does both, then I'll shake your hand. You've done a good job." And I'd like to think it does that. Yeah, but yeah, there's plenty of OMG moments, as they would say in the book.
Having produced this, as you say, millions of words, nothing like exaggeration. What are you going to do next? What's the next project? Or do you just like sleep now for about 20 years and just go, no more?
Well, I did have a break to say hi to my fiance and meet the rest of my family again, and maybe see the dogs. But my break's coming. Break's at an end now, so I've started working on a book with Phil Larder. So that book is going to be written with the coaching team from the 2003 World Cup. So we're working on that currently, and really their kind of side of the story, perspective of what happened and how they got there has never come out. So not one particularly for all the Rugby League listeners, but that's what I'll be doing next. And then the book after that might look a little bit similar to the one you're holding. That's a little hint. Possibly might continue the story of Keithley.
Cougarmania 2. This time it's personal.
Yeah, just due to the factor material that I've been handed on a plate by IMG over the past couple of months.
I mean, I do like how you stopped the league tables just before Wakefield actually got good. So thanks for that. That's brilliant.
Yeah, that was just for you,
Johnny. It is some piece of work. Thank you for writing it, because these stories need to be told. Thanks for joining us. Have a successful book. Fingers crossed people will pick it up either pre or post Christmas now. Have a great Christmas, Happy New Year, and we might get you on to talk about Phil Larder's book. Who knows? I mean, we probably won't, but we'll put the invite out there anyway.
To bring me on to talk about the next when Cougars get given a category A or F or whatever they get. That'll do. We can come shoot the proverbial on that. Yeah, that'll be a fun day. Can't wait for Twitter that day.
Think about it now. In all good bookshops, J.R. Rickwood's Cougarmania, a very, very interesting read. Now, the week before, I turned up down at the home of Rugby League, Bellevue, which is a bit of a building site at the minute. I can't believe it. For years I've been going down there, 30 years now. And, plenty of times it has been said, we're going to do this and we're going to do that, build a new stadium. They're actually doing it. And I went there because they're launching a heritage thing, because Wakefield are 150 years old next year. Not the city, that's way older. But Wakefield Trinity, 150 years old. So I went down there to hear what they're going to do, which is lots of exciting things, which I'm sure we'll talk about over the next 12 months and beyond. But also I grabbed the chairman, John Minards. There's something about Rugby League, John, and it's about the scarf.
Yeah,
I'm the same. I've got in the cupboard at home the first scarf I bought from the club shop here, whenever it was in 1992. Why Wakefield Trinity? Why are you here?
Why am I here? Well, it's my city. I mean, this is my scarf from the 1970s, the late 70s. This scarf went to Wembley with me in '79, and we're here this morning talking about the launch of the Heritage Year, the 150th anniversary. So I thought it was appropriate that I should wear my heritage scarf. But why? Because it's where I'm from. It's my city, and you don't choose your team chooses you. That's the old cliche, isn't it? But it's absolutely true. That's why.
How important has the club been to you over the years and since the 1970s?
Oh, crikey. Always there in the background. I mean, I grew up in Wakefield in the 60s and 70s, left in 81 to go away to university, having been to school here, so I used to follow the club at the latter part of that time. And then I was away from Wakefield until probably about 2 years ago, living down south, making my career down south and around the world. But it was always there in the background, and I always used to come back, certainly when my parents were alive in particular, but even after that, would come and sometimes do a 350-mile round trip on a Sunday to watch a game, mad as that sounds. Not every week, but maybe, I think there's not been a season where I haven't seen a game in all that time, but it might have been 2 or 3. And clearly I would always follow them if they were down south at one of the many London grounds or in Essex or wherever we were playing down there. So, yeah, always kept in touch.
150 years of history. And your role, I guess, is to keep the club going, right? So there's another 150 years.
I think that's exactly it. I think that's how Michael and I see it. We very much see ourselves as the custodians of Wakefield, and we happen to own shares, but actually it's not about that. It's about being the custodians and handing it on to the next generation whenever that happens. And it's just just feel very fortunate and honoured to be one of the people who is involved as we hit this particular milestone, as the people did at the 100th, I suspect, as well, and will do at the 200th. But it's a great honour. As
you say, 150 years of history and heritage. How important is it that the club celebrates that and moves forward with that heritage?
Yeah, it's that feeling of continuation, isn't it? It's celebrating the past and bringing us to where we are today, but actually the excitement of the future. I was saying this morning, we're standing in a moment of real change for the game, potentially, and a real opportunity for the game to have come together and move forward following the IMG proposals that are being debated at the moment. So there's a new era for the game of rugby league, and it's a new era for Wakefield Trinity as well, as the ground redevelopment. Again, if you go back to 2018, when I first got involved, the single thing that we needed to do more than anything else, for all of the on-field trials and tribulations over the years, the thing we had to do was redevelop the ground, or get a new ground that's redeveloped. We've landed on the idea of staying here at Bellevue. We bought the freehold. We've secured the deal to start the redevelopment and do the lion's share of the redevelopment with the new East Stand, the North Terrace, the new pitch, the floodlights, the screen, and the community hub, the building we're sitting in now, the redevelopment of that as well. So there's a lot going on, and it's just, it's a real moment. It's a moment in history, and it happens to be the 150th. We'd hoped to do it a couple of years earlier, but there was a pandemic around, so we got a bit delayed. But but we're doing it in the 150th year, which is really quite symbolic, I think.
Well, as much as I've referred to this old ground as a bit of a working museum in the past, and had the opportunity to work here briefly, but it is great that the club are able to stay on the home soil where they've been for hundreds of years, and now rebuild a new Wakefield Trinity.
Absolutely. I mean, none of us were around at the time, but all I'm told is that if you look out on that piece of turf that we've just relaid, that was just a piece of ground that was roped off in 1878. And they said, let's lay it out and start playing rugby here. And that's just amazing to think that it was just a piece of waste ground. Presumably it was grass, and they just staked out. Whether they put some posts up, I don't know. Nobody knows really. But they started playing rugby here in 1878, we're told. And it's amazing to think it's the same piece of ground that we're still playing on now. I just think that's fascinating.
I do wonder what they would think about the club still existing. What if they ever imagine it would last as long and still going?
Yeah, I don't suppose they thought about it particularly. I don't suppose you do when you start something. It's the excitement of the here and now, isn't it? But yeah, it is an amazing thing. It's only we've got the privilege of being able to look back, really, I suppose.
You mentioned IMG. How's the club fit in with whatever plans they have for the future of the game?
Well, we're positive about the plans and the idea of moving the game forward, and things do need to change in the game. We're absolutely certain about that. I'm positive about this idea of having criteria and achieving a grading, and the concept, if you like, of if you're good enough, then you're in. It's not about are you in the best 12 or the best 10 or the best 14. It's if you fulfil the standards that are required for the modern game, then you rightly deserve a place at the top table in the top tier. So I think that concept we're absolutely behind. Of course, what we're waiting for, as everybody else is what are those criteria? And then once we know what the criteria are, what are the benchmarks for a grade A and a grade B? That's what we're eagerly awaiting. But we're determined that we're going to give it our absolute everything to achieve the grade A. But we don't know exactly what it is we've got to achieve yet.
We are surrounded by photos and pictures of the great teams, the past great players, the past Hall of Famers, trophies and such. How hard is it when you're in charge of a club to actually try and not chase dreams that are impossible unless you spend money that doesn't exist?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can always have the dream and the ambition. I think, yes, you have to be, and I think this is what Michael has done so very, very well over the last 10 years, and I'm really proud to be part of it with him. The idea that the most important thing is that we continue to exist, and we do it sensibly, and we do it within a budget, and we don't lose money. We always say we're not here to make money out of this club, but we're not here to lose money. And the idea is that the club needs to be sustainable, and that's the first thing. once you've got over that and you say the most important thing is that we have a club, and we still have a club, and we'll still have a club into the future, that's what we're determined to do. When you get over that, you say, well, then you start dreaming, and you say, well, you're in a competition, you want to win it. You go into every season thinking we'd like to win the grand final and we'd like to win the cup. Those are the two competitions we're in. Why wouldn't you? Now, the realism is that that's quite difficult to do because there are some really good teams out there, some really good clubs, and St Helens have demonstrated over the last 4 years that they're a great side, and they take some beating. But we did beat them last year, and we only lost on Golden Point when we were here at Bellevue as well. So, who knows what we can do, what we can achieve. Other teams less fancied have got to finals, and if you get to a final, you've got a chance of winning it.
New facilities. I mean, we've seen plenty of artist impressions over the years, but it's actually going up. They're actually building that stand.
Yes, it is. We keep saying that, and only people in Wakefield would understand the incredulity in our voices when we say, look, they're actually building it. It's actually happening, because we have had so many. And I go back 50 years following the club, I suppose. I always say, and I thought my first game was 50 years ago this coming March. And we've seen so many false dawns about moving somewhere else, redeveloping here, backwards, forwards. But it is actually happening. There's actual steel coming out of the ground and around the place, and concrete to follow. And suddenly we'll have a redeveloped ground, or at least most of a redeveloped ground.
And you've invited new investment in the club, both from supporters and people with perhaps a bit bigger amount of cash to invest. How important is that for the club going forward, that more money comes into the club just in general?
It's helpful, but it's not a critical moment as far as the funding's concerned. I've said earlier, the club's in a stable place. Stable means you're kind of at a break-even place, and that's where you're aiming to be. So if you're at break-even, it's finely tuned, isn't it? The purpose of this investment invitation round is probably twofold. One, to foster closer links with supporters and give some of our loyal supporters who are contributing £500 or £1,000 a feeling of membership, a closer feeling with the club. I go back to the years of the 1970s when it was a members' club, whatever that meant and however that worked. But I'm trying to foster that sort of thing with it, so these people feel close to the club. So that was number one, and that raised us some money, but not hundreds of thousands. We also thought we'd put it out there to say if there are people out there with more money, for whatever reason and whatever, who would like to join us and do what we did and invest slightly more substantially in it, then we're open to those conversations. This is not a closed shop as a club. We're not looking to divest, but if more people want to join us and join in the fun that we're having, and it is great fun. It's just a real privilege and great fun running it. It has its ups and downs, but it's a great ride. Then we're inviting people in, so it's a kind of nice to have, but we're very serious about it.
So after 150 years, how would you sum up where Wakefield Trinity Rugby League Football Club is today?
I think we're on the threshold of a new era, and that's because of the ground. And we're building a community stadium. We're putting down our roots firmly in the community of Wakefield. I think that's where we stand as one of the the landmarks of Wakefield and one of the iconic names in the city of Wakefield. And as we do every season, but particularly this season with a new young coach and a new exciting team, we're looking for success on the field as well. And that's absolutely, we don't lose sight of that as well. That's something we're looking for as well. But it's just a really exciting time. 150 years old, here's to the next 150.
History was made earlier this year when 3 women were inducted into the Rugby League Hall of Fame for the very first time. Lionesses Brenda Dobek, Lisa McIntosh and Sally Milburn joined us on Zoom to talk about their careers and going into the Hall of Fame and all that kind of fun stuff. It's very exciting 2022. As we know, the Rugby League World Cup is on. The Women's World Cup starts in a few weeks' time. The wheelchair one as well. The men's has already started. And in the middle of all this, we've got the Hall of Fame ceremony in which for the first time 3 women are going to be inducted, and thankfully they're all here with us this evening, which is amazing. Lisa, Brenda, Sally, thank you very much for taking up your time. I'm going to start with Brenda because she's in my top left-hand corner, and it's the worst question in the world to ask. I mean, why and how did you get involved in rugby league in the first place?
Well, I used to play handball, and then I got the news of a taster session by an ex-rugby union guy. He wanted to set up a local team, and he put a taster session on one night. And because I'd I'd always had a little bit of involvement in rugby league by I've got three brothers that played at a semi-professional level, so I was always interested in rugby league and liked to go and watch them. So I went down to this taster session knowing full well that I would enjoy it. So I did go down and enjoy it, and then I converted from playing handball to playing rugby league and never looked back.
What's your story then, Sally?
Yeah, I was like I say, I come from Cumbria. One of the things is quite a rugby league orientated town village. Quite similar. My brother played for the local team, so I used to go watch him, and they'd set up a local team, and they said, "Why don't you come down, give it a go?" I didn't go for quite a few times and kept getting pestered, and then one of them came to my house and literally dragged me down there, and it pretty much went from there. That's where I started playing.
Well, you did get glad you did get dragged out then.
Yeah, like I say, it was a lot of good times. Yeah, so I'm thankful for that person for taking me there. Yeah.
Did you need any dragging, Lisa, or were you full guns blazing into this whole rugby league nonsense?
My first passion was football. I was really into football from a young age, and I played over at Man United Ladies before, obviously, it was like it is today. But I had a knee injury when I was younger, and also because there was not many clubs around when I was younger, there was a lot of travelling. So once I started working and stuff, it became quite difficult to be travelling to Manchester like 3 times a week. And then, like Brenda, there was something in the Courier regarding a rugby league taster session for women. And I thought, I'd probably quite enjoy that, because I did any sport. I played hockey, played netball. So I went down, and from there I was hooked, and played rugby league ever since.
I mean, when I was at school in the 90s, I think, I played for the school team, but I was terrible. I think I just made up the numbers. But I think we only had in the year group, and that would have been about 300, one girl who everyone knew played rugby league. What was it like when you were starting, Lisa? How many girls were interested in playing the game?
When I started, I was an adult. When I was at school, there wasn't any. In fact, nobody played rugby league girl-wise when I was at school. Couple played football. I played football with lads. But when I started, we probably had maybe 2 girls that came training with us, and that's because their dads were part of the male team. So they would come training, and we'd maybe give them a game. They're probably about 14-year-old at the time. And then we had quite a couple of 14-year-olds that we used to give a game and maybe put on the wing. But there wasn't anything in schools. There wasn't any girls playing with lads teams in the local area I lived in. So there was nowhere for any young girls to go play, really. They had to play open age or nothing.
And it is amazing how things have changed, Brenda, in the time, between you first become a rugby league bowler and where we sit today, where the World Cup opener is set to have potentially 10,000 people there.
Yeah, definitely. Massive step forward. A lot of hard work's gone into the game, promoting the game with the media coverage, the Super League teams taking on women's teams, and they promoted it really, really well, and that's why it's at its level that it's at today.
What was it like when you were first starting? Then was it a struggle to find opponents or find teams, or how did it all work back in the day?
Oh, everything was a struggle. We find a pitch, a club that would take us on board. We didn't have any supporters. We had to scrimp and scrape for kits. We had to borrow kits that were twice the size, for the players. It was a real struggle, real struggle.
Well, that's one of the things, I guess, Sally, of all the things that haven't changed, obviously there isn't much money in rugby league in general, let alone the women's game, and we're still having to find money to provide kits for even the not even semi-professional, but the teams linked to Super League teams, I should say.
Yeah, one of the things, like I say, but when obviously we played, one of the things, we had no finance towards one of the things. I mean, especially with me coming from Cumbria, I was having to travel a good 2.5, 3 hours to get to training and then the train, but it was all self-funded, one of the things. But we did a lot of it because for the love of the sport, basically, one of the things. But like you say, one of the things, it was a struggle with massive amounts of sponsorship and stuff like that. One of the things, we'd do anything, like I say, we'd beg and steal and borrow to get kits and things.
So how do you go from your first steps into rugby league side to representing the country? How did that journey go?
Like I say, I think I started playing when I was about 18, 19. I was a bit like Lisa on there. We weren't allowed to play it in school. Like I say, we were only allowed to play hockey in that school. Rugby wasn't one of them sports. And then, like I say, when they set up, we got into that. And then maybe I've been playing 12 months, 2 years, something like that. And I did a trials day in Lee, and we all went down a lot with other people as well, and we did a whole day session of trials, and that's where they had a lot of people watching, and they picked the squad from there, and then it went from there, really.
I mean, here's the really stupid question: the feeling when you first wear the nation's jersey, Lisa. What did that mean to you?
I mean, it was so proud, so proud. I mean, when we toured, we played obviously some warm-up games before we went against the sort of like the best of the rest. But once you got to Australia and you were stood there in that shirt with that national anthem, it just gave you goosebumps, really. And it was a really, really proud moment.
Yeah, it's the one thing. Obviously, I was at the World Cup game in Newcastle at the weekend, and you see the teams lining up, and it's difficult to really understand what it's like to represent your country if you haven't done it, and you all have. It must make you proud. And how did your family feel about doing that?
Oh, really, really proud. I mean, my sisters, when we had the World Cup in England, it was difficult for family to support and come and watch when you were in Australia and New Zealand. But then when we played in England, and we were at Cass, and we were at Dewsbury and at Orrell, family were there in the stands. Obviously, you've got this family that followed you around Yorkshire and Lancashire in all weathers, because obviously we played Winter League. We did none of this summer rugby when we played, and they would be stood on touchline with the flasks of soup and everything else that families used to bring, and for all the players, not just you. And so it a really proud moment, a really, really proud moment for them all.
So you'd have preferred to play in the summer then?
In hindsight, yes.
I don't want you to come across as one of these bitter old people who say, "Oh, it's almost better in my day." But now you said, you'd rather play in the summer. There's the kind of honesty we like.
I mean, there's nothing better than being hit sideways by hailstone at Hull.
And this is another one of those stupid questions. What kind of facilities did you have to put up with in the day? Not that everything's great these days, Brenda.
Yeah, facilities were very, very poor. I mean, we had so many bases when we first started. We had I remember we were based down at Castleford Rugby Union Ground. We shared it with the team down there. They allowed us to use it for a season, and after the game we had to not shower. We had to get in the bath, so we bathed, but the referee had to get into the bath before in and out before we could get in and out. So that was the standard of the facilities back then, and they were very, very poor, very poor.
It's almost like I want to say that the bandwagon has started. As I mentioned, I jumped on the bandwagon a few years ago, but you're the people who built the bandwagon. Do you like Brenda being seen as someone who, without the work that you and your teammates and those behind the scenes did, that Women's Rugby League was put on the path it is to today? Is that something that makes you feel proud as well?
Oh, very proud. I mean, we back then we did and went through the process of, sort of roughing it, having to play the game that we all loved, and that's. I mean, Sally mentioned earlier that the only reason that we played the game or kept us in the game was for the passion of the game, and I hope that the girls that are playing now and playing in the World Cup appreciate, what we had to go through for them to get to the level and get to play in the World Cup like they're going to be in a couple of weeks' time, and I do hope they appreciate everything that we did for them.
What's the weather like in Cumbria? Sally, did you have much hail to deal with there? Is that just a whole problem?
I know all the teams, when they used to come up with the things, they absolutely hate it coming to Cumbria. It just seems to have its own weather with the things. I always remember a team coming down from Hull, and it was absolutely lashing it down with rain and that, and they actually played with bin bags underneath the rugby kit. So it was that cold with the things, but it was it was fun. It was a laugh when the things, but things we did back then.
I mean, what parts of the modern game? I say more modern. Is it not as if you played in the 1800s or anything? But what parts of today's game would you like to have seen back when you were playing? You know, in terms of we got the women's Super League now. What would you like back when you were playing on the pitch?
Probably, like I say, to have a little bit more support from the bodies and that with the things. Like I say, it wasn't that recognised when the things. We always got like the second best on things whenever we were trying to set up in areas, and the bids. You know, it always had that little bit of mindset where women sort of shouldn't play rugby with the things. But like you say, it's but I would like to. I thought that we'd have had more support from the bodies and that lot, and like you say, be affiliated like they are now with the Super League.
I mean, Lisa, it's something that was an issue then, obviously, and it's still an issue now. People will say women shouldn't play rugby league, and no matter what you say, they're going to stick to that regardless, aren't they?
I think you are going to have those. I think it's getting not as bad as it used to be. And especially women's sport in general, to be fair, now is obviously more recognised and accepted by all sexes. But you will always have that minority that will be saying that women should not play rugby. You will have fathers who don't want their daughters to play. But I definitely think it's come on a long way since the time when I played.
I mean, we're hoping now that the young girls coming through, even the boys will see, players for St Helens and Leeds and York and whoever in the Women's Super League and idolise them. And you see girls now with players' names on the back of their shirts in the Women's Super League. Who were the players who you looked up to when you were starting out? Who did you want to emulate?
I mean, to be fair, I was one of the early ones. So it's I'm one of the, probably in my team, probably have started a little bit older. But the players that we played, obviously, with at the same time, I mean, obviously, Brenda was always one that was a player that was always recognised as one of the top players. Sally as well. Whenever we went to Barrow, we had players that we needed to make sure that we didn't allow them to play. Also, Shelley Land at Wakefield was one that, as a team, you would earmark to make sure, let's not let her play her game. So there was players like that who started at the same time. Because we was obviously one of the first teams players to play. It's really difficult to pinpoint anybody that came before us, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's a daft question to ask in hindsight.
We were first.
Are there any players today you see and you think, oh, I wish I would have been playing alongside them?
Oh, we went to watch the game against, I think it was against France at Warrington a couple of months ago. And there's Amy Arcastle, he's run so well. He's a tough player. I mean, Lewis is not playing anymore, but there's some really, really good young, fit athletes out there now. I would have loved to have played against them and loved to give them a run for the money.
Mentioning Lois there, Brenda, obviously going into the coaching ranks now. Lindsay Anfield as well, and it's so many other, Amanda Wilkinson at Barrow, of course. So many players now on the coaching staff at teams. It's good to see female coaches coaching female teams.
Is that a question to me? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, it's great to see so many female coaches coming through the ranks, and from what I've seen, the very, very good coaches. I mean, there's some really good girls coming into the game and being coached by these girls that I played alongside and I coached as well. So it's great to see. It's great to see.
And of course, Barrow, Sally, having a great season in the Women's Super League 2 this year, and only narrowly missing out on promotion to the top division of the Women's Super League.
Yeah, so I say Barrow have got two teams now, like I say, one in the Super League and the reserves team to filter through to that. They're doing absolutely fantastic. Great development going on in the Barrow area. Like I say, with all the opportunities they've got and the things, I sometimes wish I was like 20 years younger where I could be playing with them. You know what I mean? It's but no, it's fantastic. Like I say, Amanda Wilkinson, she with the coach at Barrow, she's doing brilliant as a coach. She actually played for a short while when I played in Barrow, so she actually played for one of the original Barrow teams. So no, it's great. Yeah, like I say, it's brilliant. They're doing fantastic. Yeah, I'd love to be able to play in that, and so get the crowds of that they're doing, because they are getting so much support at the moment.
Where do you see the women's game going in the future? Because obviously there's a lot of more attention on women's sport, as Lisa has mentioned. But where do you see women's rugby league going in the future?
Well, like you say, with the things like there's so much development gone on in the Australia and New Zealand and that. With the things I can see, certainly the Super League going forward and that. I know they get expenses and things like that, but I can see them in the future doing it as a full-time job when it is, and like a full-time career, which is great.
Obviously, Lisa, as I say, people get paid in the NRLW these days, but would you like to have gone and played in Australia club-wise in this era?
Oh, definitely. I mean, obviously we toured out there. I love the facilities. I love the temperature. Even when we toured out there, obviously we Brisbane Broncos hosted us all those years ago, and the facilities that they've got, because obviously rugby league in Australia is their number one sport. So there are lots and lots of facilities out there, but because of the weather conditions, there is a lot of fields where you don't need floodlights. You can play every week. Your pitches aren't going to be waterlogged. They're not going to be boggy. And I just would have really enjoyed playing out there, and the lifestyle would have suited me.
I mean, this World Cup might be a short window for some of the younger English players to get really on the radar. Not that they won't know about them already, but really on the radar of the clubs in the NRLW.
Oh, definitely. I mean, all you've got to do is football now, where you've got English players playing at Barcelona and Paris Saint-Germain, and so no reason why the British players, English players, can't be going out there and playing for Sydney and Brisbane and the women's teams out there. And I think it's brilliant. Just hope that the World Cup it continues after the World Cup, and all this publicity that they're getting at the World Cup continues, because rugby league in England, we know, it's not the main priority sport in England, and that's not just for women, that's for men. So I hope after this World Cup, all this publicity that they're getting, that it continues, because it needs to continue for it to move forward, and for us to be able to compete with Australia and New Zealand, and the way that they've brought their women forward, the sort of like publicity and the funding that they're getting needs to continue for us to improve.
The Rugby League Hall of Fame, Brenda, is the elites of the elites. I think, is it 23, 26 men in there at the moment? And you three are the first women ever into the Hall of Fame. How did you find out about it, and what was your first reaction?
Well, I first found about I was out at work. I worked for Royal Mail, so I'm a postie, so I was out delivering my mail, and I got a phone call, and it was from Julie Lee, and she said to me, I sat down, and I said, why should I be? I said, I'm at work. Should I be sat down? She went, well, yes. She said, I just want to give you the news that you're going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. I was absolutely gobsmacked. I couldn't believe what she was saying to me, but obviously it was fantastic news. And yeah, it's quite surreal. I'm finding it hard for it to sink in that we're going to be the three of us are going to be alongside so many famous names in the Hall of Fame. It's just absolutely unbelievable.
And this, of course, is only the beginning, Sally. Again, how did you find out about it, and what were your first reactions to the news?
Quite similar to Brenda, really. One of the things, I was actually at work at the time, and I'd missed a call and got an answer phone message, and that was off Julia Lee, and it was to give her a ring back. So I rang her back when I had a break, and she was like, you know, pretty similar with the things. I just want to let you know that you've made it into the Hall of Fame, and I'm like, what with the things? I was totally gobsmacked by it with the things. I didn't expect it. It's brilliant, you know, fantastic with the things, but it's but yeah, I'm over the moon with it. It's good, and like Brenda says there with the things, it's sitting alongside the Men's Hall of Fame, and us three will be in there, and that lets any future Super League England player and that aspire to, and they can come and sit alongside, it's great. So fantastic.
So I'm guessing, Lisa, you missed a call as well, and you had to ring someone back. Or is your story different?
Slightly. I was driving when Julia rang me, and like me always, I'm nosy what who else has got in. But it was a shock because we played. Obviously, I haven't played rugby for probably 20 years, maybe not that long. So you don't think for 1 minute that you're going to get a phone call after so many years to say that you've been recognised for the rugby that you played 15, 20 years ago. So I were a little bit shocked. Like Brenda said, it were a bit surreal. But then gradually, obviously, as we're getting people contacting us, and then there's press releases, it starts to sink in, and it's like, wow, this is brilliant. And we're going to be. I mean, it's quite daunting, really, because we are going to be up there with your Ellery Hanleys and all those sorts of players like that in Hall of Fame, and we're going to be the first. So even when we're not here, we're still going to be up there in the Hall of Fame, which is amazing, really. It's amazing, and this is something that we never expected anything like this. We played as rugby because we really enjoyed it and we loved it. And the recognition that we're getting now is brilliant.
Yeah, unless you've got a massive ego, Brenda, which I'm assuming you don't have. You don't go into anything, whether it's singing or acting or playing rugby league, expecting to one day be elevated to the very highest level of achievement.
No, absolutely not. I mean, it's like Lisa's just said, I just played it because I absolutely loved and I was so passionate about the game. That was enough for me, just going out there and being able to play. So to get this recognition is just, it's amazing.
Abigail, our friend, who is a 9-year-old, I think she's 9. She plays for Limehouse Lions near Rochdale, big Rochdale fan. What would be your advice to her and girls of her age who are thinking about playing rugby league, from your own experience, Brenda, and from what you've seen going on in the current day?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the young girl is connected to a club at the moment, and if she's not, then find a local club, because she'll be able to probably play a mixed rugby at this time, even if there's not a junior girls about. She'll be able to play mixed rugby up to probably, I think, the age of 11 or 12. So she'll get a lot of experience through that. And just if she's passionate enough about just about the game, just follow her dreams. And there's the whole world ahead of her, and they're proving now that the pathway to play for your country is there, to follow, if that's what she's passionate about, and if that's a dream, just follow her dreams.
What would your advice be, Sally?
Yeah, it's quite similar to Brad, really, with the things, follow our dreams with the things, like I say. If we hadn't stuck at it and done our best on the bits, we wouldn't have achieved what we have today. But like, work hard, play hard, enjoy it, and try your best, and that's all you can do.
I guess that's the advice for everyone, Lisa, isn't it? If you want to play rugby league, go and enjoy yourself, because that's what it's all about.
Yeah, and it is, and it's not about winning trophies. It's not even about getting in Hall of Fame. At the end of the day, rugby league for me, when we played, was having that friendship, that sort of like having a togetherness, everybody having the same goal. But not only that, the fitness levels, enjoying getting yourself fit, keeping healthy, but not only physically healthy, but obviously, especially in this day and age, keeping mentally healthy. And to have a theme where a group of girls are getting together experience playing sport together. You can't ask for anything better. And if from that you get to play for England or you get to go play in the NRL, then that's brilliant. But the most important thing is just enjoy your time. Enjoy whatever level you play at. Enjoy it and make some fantastic memories and some fantastic friends.
It's obviously the world has changed completely since you all stopped playing, and women's rugby league is a much bigger, higher profile these days. How much would you have swapped your experiences back then, Brenda, for having a go in this era?
I would love to be able to play in this era. I mean, the competition is much bigger. The expectations are higher. You know, the support is there. The media is there. And I played in a couple of World Cups, but to be able to play in this one, in this day and age, in your own country, with the support that you get, you know, I do believe all the players are getting paid to play, which is a massive step forward. I would absolutely love to play in this day and age.
I mean, as much as I can say, Sally, you don't expect to enter the Hall of Fame and things like that. Did you ever expect you'd see England playing Brazil in the World Cup?
No, but it is like I say, like we did our World Cup in 2003. It was like I say, it was mainly the Pacific Islands that came, but Brazil, Jamaica, with the things, why not? But like I say, it's a massive development, and it is good for the sport. It's brilliant.
So basically, you all had great careers, but you'd all swap it for summer rugby. That's what I'm like. Obviously, lots of great achievements. Forget the money and everything, but the fact that you could play in the warm. And believe me, I've been to Wakefield in February, and it's not warm there either. Again, is it? It's an amazing journey you've all had. It's an amazing story, and obviously the Hall of Fame is going to be the icing on the cake, so to speak. But what happens next? What happens next for women's rugby league in this country, and how can we use your experiences to improve things for the future, Lisa?
I think our experience is around funding, making sure that the game gets support financially, making sure the game gets support with physios, training facilities, and publicity. And that seems to be happening. And for it to carry on growing, I think financially is a massive thing for the women. And to be bringing it. I mean, they take it into schools now, but I think there needs to be more development with the young teams. And it to be natural, like you see on a park on a Saturday or a Sunday, how many junior boys teams there are. And eventually, it'd be nice to be able to say the same about the girls. That the same amount of girls can be playing as what young lads are playing, and they have similar pathways, and that means through the coaching, if they or even through the development of wanting to become coaches. And I think it's important that financially that the game needs the support.
What do you think about the Australians playing only 70 minutes? Every time I speak to any of the current players, they all say, "Well, you know, would you like to play 70 minutes yourself with the extra 10 minutes to rest?" And they go, "No. We would not do that."
No, not a chance. I can remember when we first started playing, and I think I remember this. We started playing 9-a-side, and I think we used to play 9-a-side for 30 minutes, and then I think that went to 11-a-side to 40 minutes. So we'd even have less players, and still we want to play longer. I feel robbed if I only play minutes.
No concessions. I mean, we're all hoping that this extra 10 minutes of play we've had all season in Women's Super League helps us against the Australians, because we'll need all the help. Ladies, thank you very much for your time. Congratulations on being the first ever Women's Hall of Famers. I hope you have a great night at the Hall of Fame dinner. I hope you enjoy the World Cup, and hopefully we can tell you can tell your stories going forward, and future generations of players are inspired by your careers and where you've ended up. But again, thank you very much for your time this evening. So that's it. That's the end of this selection box of stuff. I hope you've enjoyed it. Some interesting stories told. Hopefully the questions weren't too bad. Join us in 2023. Although there will be some stuff before that, I think, if I can get my brain into gear to edit it before the end of 2022. If not, join us in 2023 for more Rugby League here on the 4020 exciting podcast and YouTube channel, which is adjacent to the magazine, which is also out and is better than this. I mean, I write in it, but, he's much better than this.